Hey learner, dive into something deep with me today. We're cracking open a book that's been causing a stir for, well, over a century and a half, Das Kapital by Karl Marx.
Classic.
We won't try to tackle the whole thing though, right? I mean, that'd be a deep dive for like a lifetime. But we've got our hands on a nicely abridged version so we can still unearth those golden nuggets.
The good stuff.
Exactly. Get ready, because this is going to be a wild ride. So
Okay.
before we even crack open the spine, you might be thinking, why bother with a book this old? Like, is Das Kapital even relevant in today's world? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It's still incredibly relevant. See, it's not just some dusty old theory. It's about the very system we operate under every single day, the economic realities we often take for granted. And believe me, once you view the world through Marx's lens, it's hard to unsee it.
It's eye-opening for sure. So our mission today is to grasp Das Kapital, right, without getting bogged down in the jargon. We're after those core ideas, the heart of Marx's argument, and what it means for you, the learner, today.
Exactly. It's like understanding the DNA of capitalism itself, seeing the gears turning beneath the surface of everyday life.
Okay, so Marx kicks things off with a deceptively simple question. How do capitalists actually make more money than they invest in the first place?
It's like an economic magic trick, right?
Totally. They buy something for a certain price, sell it for more. Where's that extra value coming from? Right. So Marx says, hold on, it's not magic. It's something he calls the exploitation of labor. Now picture this. A capitalist buys raw materials, hires workers, and then sells that finished product for a profit. Marx argues that extra profit, what he calls surplus value, comes from workers not being compensated for the full value they actually create.
Yeah.
They're putting in the work, the real value, but someone else is reaping the full rewards.
That's the crux of it. And to really explain this, Marx introduces the concept of labor power.
Okay, break that down for us.
So it's not just about how much work someone does in an hour, right? It's their very capacity to create value, something capitalists buy, but then extract even more value than what they pay for.
Okay, I'm following you.
Think of it like this. If a worker creates, say, $100 worth of value in an hour, but they're only paid $20, that extra $80, that's the surplus value Marx is talking about.
Wow, okay. So it's not just about time spent working, it's the actual value being generated. That really changes how you look at things, wages, the price of things, even the choices we make as consumers. It makes you stop and think, how much of what I paid for this is actually going back to the person who made it?
That's a good question to ask.
And Marx, he doesn't stop there. He goes on to trace the entire evolution of capitalism, from those small workshops to the massive mechanized factories of his time. He argues this shift wasn't some random thing, but driven by, you guessed it, the relentless pursuit of more and more surplus value.
It's a theme we see again and again.
Definitely. And one of the biggest game changers he observed was the introduction of machinery.
Right. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing.
Exactly. Now, he recognized that machines, sure, they boost productivity, but he also saw a downside. This increased efficiency often meant that wealth was concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer capitalists.
And of course, the big question becomes, what about the workers? This is where Marx's concept of the Industrial Reserve Army comes in. He saw how capitalism creates this pool of unemployed people just waiting in the wings, ready to fill those jobs, often for less pay.
And that creates this constant competition, right? Makes it harder for workers to demand better wages or working conditions. Someone is always willing to take less.
Sadly, that's often the case. And it's important to remember the context here. Marx was writing during the Industrial Revolution. He saw the social cost of this rapid industrialization, firsthand workers being displaced, the growing divide between the haves and have-nots. His analysis comes directly from that reality.
Okay, so we've got this surplus value driving the growth of capitalism.
Yeah.
But where does money itself fit into all of this?
Ah, yes, money.
It's at the heart of it all, isn't it? So for Marx, money wasn't simply a neutral tool for exchanging goods and services.
Not at all.
He saw it as a powerful force that could be used to control and manipulate the entire economic system. He digs deep into how money is used to build up wealth, create debt.
And even influence political systems, don't forget that.
Right. He was especially wary of the rising influence of credit and banking. He saw how banks could lend money to governments and businesses, creating these huge cycles of debt that often benefited, guess who, the wealthy.
While potentially destabilizing the entire economy.
Exactly. And it's not just this big picture stuff, right? Marx, he dives into the nitty-gritty details. One thing I find fascinating is his incredible attention to detail.
Oh, absolutely. He was meticulous, a true scholar.
He wasn't content with just theorizing from some ivory tower. He dug into factory reports, economic data, even the technical specifications of machinery.
He wanted to understand the system from the inside out.
And that's where you really see his genius. For instance, he spends a lot of time breaking down the working day. He observed how capitalists were constantly trying to squeeze more and more labor out of workers.
Maximize those profits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Extend that workday as much as possible. It's like they were trying to defy the laws of time and physics to get more work out of people. So how did they do it? What were the strategies?
Well, Marx called it this vampire-like thirst for surplus labor, and he analyzed how capitalists would use different tactics. Things like speeding up the machinery, reducing break times, even manipulating the factory clocks to make workers stay longer.
Wow. Talk about sneaky.
Yeah.
So it was like this constant battle over time itself.
In a way, yes.
And for Marx, this wasn't just some random detail. He connected it directly to this pursuit of surplus value. It's about power, right?
Absolutely.
Who has the power to determine how long a working day should be?
Exactly.
The struggle over time, he argued. It was a microcosm of this larger class struggle playing out on the factory floor.
And isn't it interesting to consider how much of that still resonates today?
Oh, I think so, yeah.
I mean, the gig economy, the expectation to always be on,
Mm-hmm.
the blurring of those lines between work and leisure.
It really makes you wonder how much has really changed since Marx's time. Are we just caught in a new version of the same cycle with different players, different costumes?
It's a question worth asking.
But going back to Marx's historical context for a moment, he also talks about how capitalism is constantly revolutionizing the means of production. New technologies, it's not just about efficiency.
Right.
It can also be a way to increase control over labor, would you say?
Absolutely. He saw this happening with the rise of the factory system.
Right.
The introduction of machines, while increasing productivity, often led to what we call de-skilling of workers,
Meaning?
making them more replaceable, more like cogs in a machine than skilled artisans.
So it's not just about the technology itself, but how it shifts that balance of power. And it's not just about the machines either, right? I mean, Marx also goes into the social relations of production. He talks about how capitalism creates these hierarchies and this control within the workplace itself. Managers, foremen, supervisors, all enforcing the rules and expectations set by the capitalists.
It's that top-down structure.
And this is where his concept of alienation comes in, right? Big one.
Big one.
So Marx argued that under capitalism, workers can become estranged from their own labor.
Or disconnected.
They don't own the means of production. They often have little control over the work process itself, and the products they create don't belong to them. They might even lose a sense of ownership over their own skills and creative potential.
It's a loss of control, a loss of connection.
It's like they're pouring their energy into something, but they never really get to experience the full satisfaction of seeing it through or reaping its full rewards. Makes me think about how many people today feel truly fulfilled by their jobs.
That's a good question.
It's something to think about. Now, another key concept in Das Kapital is the role of money. Again, Marx doesn't see money as this neutral tool for exchange.
No.
For him, money is this force that shapes our social relations, even our values.
It's powerful.
He talks about commodity fetishism, this process where the relationships between people become obscured by the relationships between things. We start to see money and commodities as having inherent value, forgetting that their value actually comes from human labor, social relationships.
It's a distraction.
It's like we get blinded by those shiny objects.
It's the gadgets, the pursuit of more stuff.
Exactly. And in that process, we fail to see the underlying power dynamics, the inequalities that are woven into the fabric of the system itself.
It's a powerful illusion, a world of appearances where the true mechanisms of power can remain hidden.
So the question then becomes, how do we break free from this illusion?
Right. What are the implications of all this for the way we live and work in the world?
So we've uncovered these hidden mechanisms of power, this illusion that Marx is trying to shatter. But it makes you wonder, what's the alternative?
Right. If we accept Marx's critique of capitalism, then what? What are we striving for?
Exactly. What kind of future are we working towards?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And, Marx doesn't really give us a detailed blueprint.
He doesn't.
No, not really. He was more focused on analyzing how capitalism worked, where it might lead, rather than laying out a utopian vision. But he does offer some intriguing hints.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do those hints look like? What kind of world?
The means of production, the factories, the land, the resources, they're not controlled by a select few, but owned collectively.
Collectively.
Yeah, imagine a world where production is actually geared towards meeting everyone's needs, not just maximizing profit.
Okay, so instead of primarily benefiting the capitalists, we're working for the common good. It's a compelling idea, but how do we get there? Like, how do we transition from our current system to this radically different one?
Well, Marx believed that the process itself, the struggle of workers organizing, challenging the status quo, that's what paves the way.
So it's through that struggle that we find the path.
Exactly. As people become more aware of their shared interests, as they push for greater control over their working lives, they start to create new forms of cooperation, new ways of making decisions, ultimately, new social values based on solidarity, on equality.
So it's not just about changing the economic rules of the game, it's a fundamental shift in human consciousness.
Exactly. Marx understood that real change, lasting change, it requires a profound transformation. Not just in our material conditions, but in how we relate to one another, how we view work itself, how we define progress.
That's a tall order.
It is, but he believed that a socialist society, a truly socialist society, it would nurture a new kind of human being, one free from the alienation, the exploitation that he saw as inherent in capitalism.
It's a beautiful idea, but history hasn't always been kind to these attempts at building socialist societies, has it?
Right.
And you look at the Soviet Union, China, Cuba. These experiments, they may have started with good intentions, but they often ended up, well, mired in authoritarianism, economic inefficiency. Doesn't that suggest a fundamental flaw in Marx's vision?
Well, I think it's important to remember that those historical examples, they were shaped by very unique circumstances, internal conflicts, external pressures, the legacy of pre-existing social structures. It's really too simplistic to reduce those complex events to a simple validation or refutation of Marx's ideas.
So you're saying his analysis might still hold value, even if the specific historical context has changed?
Precisely. The core issues he identified, the concentration of wealth and power, the potential for worker exploitation, those alienating aspects of modern work, they haven't gone away.
They haven't.
No. In fact, some would argue they've become even more pronounced in our age of globalization and hyper-financialization.
So where does this leave us, the learners, navigating this complex world?
Yeah.
How do we take these ideas, these critiques, and apply them to our own lives?
Well, for me, I think the first step is awareness. Das Kapital, even if you don't agree with everything in it, it offers a valuable framework for understanding how capitalism functions, its strengths, its weaknesses, its potential for both progress and, yes, destruction.
But understanding is just the beginning, right? What's next?
Action. Once you start to see the world through this new lens, it's hard to ignore the call for change, right? Whether that means, organizing for better working conditions, advocating for policies that promote economic justice, or even just making more conscious choices as consumers, as investors.
Yeah.
There are countless ways to work towards a more equitable future.
So there you have it, our deep dive into Karl Marx's Das Kapital. It's a challenging read, no doubt, but also a deeply rewarding one. It pushes us to question those assumptions, to confront some uncomfortable truths, and maybe even dare to imagine a world beyond the limitations of the systems we often just take for granted.
It's a journey.
Keep these ideas in mind as you navigate the complexities of our modern world. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will spark your own journey of discovery. Go back to the source material, explore different interpretations, keep asking those tough questions. That's what it's all about.